Hey, welcome to the channel, and it is time for me to write another 1,000 word story. Exactly 1,000 word story, inspired by a piece of artwork on the spot. So come with me on this quaint journey of mine to learn from my mistakes or perhaps enjoy a story. We shall see. This one's going to be a weird one. It's kind of strange, and for its strangeness, I needed some strange music. Now, I stumbled upon this artist, never heard of this person before, but it fit very nicely. And that album is called False and is by an artist named Lambert. Very strange, very whimsical, and I believe it is very appropriate to go along with this artwork. So cue it up and feel those quirky vibes while we check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Hesitant, and it's by a digital artist named Hulib from Montreal, Canada. I've been wanting to do a piece by Hulib for some time. He has such an interesting style and he's very, very prolific, but this one really caught my eye, so let's take a closer look. We have someone who looks like they're in a spacesuit of sorts, except instead of an astronaut helmet, we have a what almost looks like a microwave. It's like a cube with a depression in the front. It doesn't appear as if there's any glass covering it. And he's in a kitchen. There's an open cupboard behind him. There's some stuff on the counter. There's a bowl of fruit. And what's most curious is right below him, what he's looking at is a little version of him. So this one to me, it appears as if it holds a lot of symbolism. I don't know if it does. I don't know what really inspired this, but I dig it. I dig it a lot. And so I knew I had to attempt a story. Thank you, Hulib. I am very excited to finally be composing a story inspired by one of your pieces. So with that said, let's see what I came up with. The kitchen was empty, like X's head. That's what he'd been told anyway, although he knew it wasn't true, but still kept it to himself because it was always better when people thought you had an empty head. X, his name. It's what he thought of himself, so it's what you should think of him. The kitchen wasn't empty, in truth. There were other things. Haze, for one. Like you see in movies, as if no one ever dusts, no matter how wealthy the people appear. At least open a window, he always thought. No one ever did. He assumed the effect was to create drama and atmosphere. So he stood on the outskirts of the kitchen, shoes edging the linoleum, so he could get a nice wide view of this empty kitchen, in case it was a ruse, because empty kitchens always seemed to be. He didn't need drama or atmosphere, though sneaking down here for a snack might create drama if he wasn't careful. He checked his suit, which he wore whenever he left his room as a protective measure. Everything was in order. Zippers zipped, pockets buttoned, gloves and boots affixed. He flexed his fingers, then his toes, then both together. X stumbled back, losing equilibrium, catching himself on the doorframe. Something moved inside the kitchen. Not drama or atmosphere. Well, maybe. He stepped onto the linoleum, which was rippled from time and heat, he supposed. He hadn't been down here since he was a fetus, at least without the suit. Yes, a fetus, still inside his mother as she pattered around the kitchen, before the linoleum had grown distraught, before she had. X kept to the straight lines of the linoleum print, one foot in front of the other, toe pressing the heel with each stride. His name was comprised of what could have been straight lines once, though now angled and crossed. X held his arms out for balance, head straight, or what served as a head. An empty box, because his head was empty, of course, scuffed at the edges with a square at the front, where his face would be if he had one. He would have smiled if he had a mouth, but he could see despite having no eyes. Come to think of it, he wasn't sure why he wore the suit at all. Not having a head to breathe in what could be poisonous dust, spores maybe, from the fruit in the bowl on the table, which appeared fresh. He knew otherwise, could see the subtle movement of the skin where the scavengers burrowed, decomposing the once sweet flesh. X shivered and brought his arms around himself, hugged himself really, and something inside him, if he had an inside at all, bubbled. And he saw bubbles then, drifting across the room, mingling with the haze, coated with it, their surfaces transforming from glossy to matte, their transparency dwindling, then gone. X could reach the table with the fruit if he took 2 more steps forward or fell over, which he felt like doing now, realizing he stood not on the straight lines of the linoleum, but on the centers of the squares that were so black they must be bottomless pits. They weren't. But X fell anyway, onto the table, where his hands planted at its edge. Well, his gloves, because he didn't have hands. His head, empty yet heavy, bent down from the movement to see something most curious. Himself. A miniature version. Little X looked up at him, dressed the same, with the same scuffed box head and the same absence of expression. "Who are you?" X asked. "You," Little X said. "But I'm me." "So am I." X studied Little X for any detail that would prove he was something else, a copy, an imposter. Everything seemed in order, and it troubled him. "Aren't you going to hit me?" Little X said. X's arm was raised, his hand clenched into a fist. "No," he said and returned his hand to the table. "Good, because I know you don't like that." "Don't like what?" "To be hit." X shivered again, hugged himself again, and found that he did have arms inside the suit. They were thin and hurt from his touch. "Stop it," X said. "Stop what?" "You're not me. You don't know what I like or don't." "I do," Little X said. "But I won't hurt you." "Like you could," X said. "I could. I may be small, but I know things. I know that she doesn't like it when you leave the cabinet doors open, and that earns you 1 strike. A 2nd strike for the cluttered counter." "But I didn't do it," X said, hand raised again. "It doesn't matter," Little X said. "Just like your name. You think if you hide behind dead eyes, she'll think you're dead when she comes into your room and—" X slammed his open hand down on Little X, who collapsed with a crunch. X went to grind his palm into the table, but a pain shot up both arms, and he staggered back. I'm sorry." Little X sat up the best he could with broken arms and broken legs, and X saw a face in that empty square. "It's okay," the face said, small and frail. "I forgive you." The open cabinet and the counter in disarray intensified the pain in X's arms. "No," the little face said, "because he wasn't Little X, was he? There's no time. Go back to your room, where you can hide, where you can play dead until she forgets, and then you can try again." X picked up Little X with both hands, because that's who he was. X was sure of it. "I trust you." "I know," Little X said. "You always do." "I don't understand." "You always say that," Little X said. "Now, put me down." "Why?" "Because you always do." "Not this time." "No?" X smiled. "No, not this time." Little X smiled, too. Linoleum is a hard word to say sometimes, at least when you're narrating, but welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned, and there were some failings in this story. Structurally, symbolically, probably some other things that I didn't catch, but let us dig into the writing, and I will talk about this strange story called Hesitant. So as we know, I am very much inspired by the names of these pieces of artwork quite frequently, and because we have this man, this boy, I guess, named X, who I named X, he's hesitant to enter the kitchen. He appears as if he's come down for a snack, and I think that's one of the failings here. So whenever I try to write a scene or a chapter, you always want to establish, what does the character want? What are they doing here? And I did add this line down here, though sneaking down here for a snack might create drama if he wasn't careful. I would have liked to put it at the beginning, right? You want to set off the desire right off the bat. And even though I said his head was empty, I could have said his stomach was empty, right? He's coming down here for a snack. But anyway, this is what I went with. After the fact, I thought about that, and I will probably revise it later. But I like to keep these things raw and unedited just so you guys can see exactly what I created in the about an hour of time that I took to write this story. So we have this weird little man, I guess, named X, and he's talking about how people have been telling him that his head is empty. And so I'm not sure if you quite got it yet, but what this story turned out to be for me anyway is a story of child abuse, I guess, in a way. We have this kid who has concocted this very strange environment. He imagined himself wearing the suit and looking down at himself, right? He's disconnected from himself. He is compartmentalizing himself in a way. And that's what I got from the image. I'm sure you could have told all kinds of crazy stories that did involve an actual suit and a person with no face, but that's kind of the way I went. And I feel like a lot of the things here weren't emphasized enough, but I can definitely go back and clean those up and hopefully make those call outs more apparent. But anyway, let's follow along X on this story. And X, you know, is something that I try to see it in there. I try to give it some kind of meaning when I talk about X's over his eyes, particularly when little X is talking to him. And so this is a little bit of a seed of that. So X, his name, it's what he thought of himself, so it's what you should think of him. And I actually direct the reader at that point. I kind of did it a little bit more when I was going through it, but when I actually edited it, don't worry, during the recording, I changed that. I didn't want to get too far into second person at all. And I don't know where this came from. I guess because of the image itself, it looked kind of hazy. And so I thought of those times in movies, you know, you're always watching films where there's this persistent haze in rooms with light streaming in, and you're like, nobody's house is like that, right? At least, I mean, I don't see dust like that in my house. But maybe if I had the right lens, maybe if I turned all the lights off and let the sunlight come in, who knows? But anyway, that's where that led to, and this is when we first find him being hesitant at the edge of the linoleum here in the kitchen, so he could get a wide view of this in case it was a ruse. So he's very fearful at this point of what's going to happen, and he did not need drama or atmosphere, but though sneaking down here for a snack might create that drama. So then here's checking out a suit. I wanted to make sure that I established that, because one thing I forget to do sometimes because I'm looking at artwork while I write is paint the picture for you in words. And so that's one thing that I always have to go back and fix a little bit, because sometimes because I'm looking at it, I don't think to translate it to the page, because a lot of these people probably in the future when I publish this in an anthology, they're not going to be looking at the artwork. So the story needs to stand alone. And so I've been trying to get on myself a lot more about that. That's what that paragraph is. And I think right here, what I've changed here is something moved inside the kitchen. So I should have put this in the beginning. So I have action, and then I have an explanation of why the action happened. So that was a little bit jarring when I went back and read it while I was reading it. And this was a really weird thing. I don't know where it came from, but it ended up working out in my favor. X, he hadn't been down here since he was a fetus, at least not without the suit. Yes, a fetus, still inside his mother as she pattered around the kitchen before the linoleum had grown distraught. Before she had. And yes, I know I spelled that wrong. There we go. And here I used the actual print of linoleum. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had linoleum in your lives, but as a kid and growing up in the 80s, houses had a lot of linoleum, at least the ones I grew up in. And I just remember really weird kind of tacky patterns on these things before everybody migrated over to tile floors or wood. But anyway, I imagine those patterns, and I imagine him kind of using them in a way, visualizing them as traps almost. And so he's creeping along the straight lines and trying to stay away from those bottomless pits, or at least what he imagines them to be. And this is when I get more into describing his physical features, because normally I don't like to do that because it kind of pulls you away from the narration. It pulls you away from limited third person, which is normally what I like to try to write in. But I felt it was worthwhile doing that because, again, the image is so weird, the circumstances are so weird, and honestly, when I finished writing this, I was thinking, like, I don't know if any of you guys out there have read Jeff Vandermeer, but he does some really weird stuff, particularly with his newer fiction, and this is kind of the vibe I was getting from it. I don't think it's too out there and like biological horror necessarily like his stuff, but it just has some weird aspects to it. And we start to get inside his head about how he doesn't have a face, he doesn't have a mouth, he can't breathe in this dust and these spores. He's bodiless, essentially. He's sort of viewing himself as insignificant, as an empty suit, I guess. And I'm starting to paint the picture a little bit more, talking about there's a bowl of fruit on the table, and he can see it decomposing despite it looking fresh. So just another piece of imagery that just kind of helps communicate the way he's seeing the world and how that may reflect back on himself. And this is one thing that I wish I would have continued or made it have some sort of story significance. And it just popped out of my mind because he pulls back, he brings his arms to himself, he hugs himself because something inside of him bubbles. Then I just went in with, he visually saw bubbles, and it's kind of an interesting image because they're drifting across the room, they're glossy, they're transparent, and then they become coated with the dust and the haze that's in this room. They lose their transparency. and then they turn Matt as well. So it would have been nice to sort of tie that into the story somehow. I think, one could argue that it's just, again, it's sort of a representation of maybe his headspace. And we see here that he finally meets little X. So he kind of stumbles forward because, again, he's feeling as if he's going to fall down because of the crazy linoleum work. And then they start to have an exchange. Who are you? You, but me. So am I. And so this is when he's kind of figuring out who the hell this person is. And then there's even a moment when he pulls himself away from that identification when he sees a face materialize, which of course is his face. Maybe this is a little too ham-fisted, maybe it's a little too obvious, but then we find that X is raising his arm to swat away this strange little being he finds, and then the little guy echoes back, you don't like to be hit, where he says, "Are you going to hit me?" And that's one thing I wanted to do, because a lot of times when I write, and I over-describe things quite a bit, like positioning of people or actions and stuff. And one technique that I've been trying to use more often is when you have two people or more people in a space, and one of those other people can say something that will actually relay an observation of what another character is doing. And I find that to be a really cool way, a cleaner way of describing action sometimes in a group setting, because otherwise you might find yourself describing every little beat and every position of every character. After this conversation, or the opening of the conversation, when little X is saying he doesn't want to be hit, he finally feels himself. He feels arms inside his suit. He feels that they are bruised or something is going on there. And there's a little bit of an identity crisis where Big X, or regular X, is arguing with little X and saying, you don't know who I am, you don't know what I like or I don't. Sort of, backing into himself. He's sort of regressing into his abused state, his state of denial. And this is when everything is completely explained by little X. So it's almost, again, the outside, he's projecting it. It is coming back at him to remind him of what the dangers are in this strange little kitchen he finds himself in. And here, like I said, this is when the significance of his name. So X, as in, X is over your eyes, meaning you're dead. So I imagine this guy just kind of hiding in his room, playing dead or not playing dead. I think it's more a representation of what would be happening than a literal description of it. But then finally, X, he slams down on him, but then he's sorry, right? He's enacted the actual violence that he appears to be, or he seems to be, subjected to. And poor little X is broken. And this is when his face finally shows up. And he calls him, the face said, small and frail, meaning that he is detached. X has detached himself from little X, and that is exemplified here, little face said, because he wasn't little X, but he quickly comes back. And he picks him up, and that's when he has the connection. And he finally says, he starts realizing or being instructed that he does this all the time. He keeps doing this all the time. I know, you always do. I don't understand. You always say that. Now put me down. Why? Because he's going to leave him behind and go hide away. But there is a change of heart. And he says, not this time. No. X smiled. No, not this time. Little X smiled too. And I think when X smiles, maybe it would have been better if it was like he feels a smile, because I've kind of established that he doesn't have a face. But that is the story. So those are the things I like. Those are my regrets. Those are some things I would change. I think there's something here. And again, like a lot of these stories, it's one of these things that I didn't really realize. I didn't discover it until I got way far down into it. I didn't know if I was going to make it some weird straight sci-fi piece where it's, a guy in a suit and a weird mask, and he's discovering a little him in here. I have no idea, but it turned out to have a little bit more depth than that. I do not think this is quite solid yet, but hopefully you can see what I was trying to get at, or at least what I discovered while I was writing it. In any case, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and give me a like if you liked the video, subscribe for story-related content, and of course, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.